Good afternoon, everyone. I think we're getting close to having everyone here with us. Everyone's so nice and prompt. Thank you for joining us this sunny afternoon. Okay, it's officially 3 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. And this is Jan Burrell, the Volunteer Initiatives Program Manager here at 501 Commons, and I am sitting in a dark, cool conference room with my colleagues Carrie Kazuki and Jim Pullen, and we have Nancy Long with us today remotely as well. And just making sure that our technology works here. There we go. I don't know if you guys can see that, but of course my computer wants me to restart right now. That's not really an option, so give me just a minute here. Okay, well, a brief overview of our agenda. Obviously, we're here to talk about the Pathways process and hope give you the information you need to feel successful in this role. We've had a few consultants want to participate in the conversation just to make sure that it's a good fit for them, so that's perfectly acceptable as well, and we're grateful for you taking the time to be with us today. Today we'll talk about the 5 elements of a healthy nonprofit model, which is what our new self-assessment is founded on. As well as the assessment itself, kind of the role of the consultants throughout this Pathways process, and then get a little bit more into detail about the Pathways process itself. But first I wanted to go with a round of introductions. I was hoping we could take this as the opportunity to try out the technology and make sure that it's working for everyone. I was hoping we could have people share who they are, what their names are, and what brings them to the Pathways table. I'm going to venture out on a limb here and try to unmute everyone. If sound becomes a huge issue, then I'll go down the list one by one and unmute folks. But and if we don't hear from you, I'll just assume that we're having a little bit of technology issues. We do have a chat box that we'll be monitoring, so if you're more comfortable typing questions or comments into the chat box, feel free to do that. We're hoping that this will be an interactive conversation. We had an in-person orientation last week, and consultants had great questions, and it provided a good opportunity for us to learn what more we need to say about the program, as well as what people might want to know about. So feel free chiming in and grab my attention verbally if we don't happen to see your comments in the chat box. So without further ado, I'm going to unmute everyone, if I can. Okay. May not be able to unmute everyone, so I'm just going to go down the list. Linda, are you able to join us today verbally and maybe tell us a little bit about what brings you to the Pathways table, figurative table?
Yeah, so I assume this is Linda Gaynor. Is that the right Linda?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Well, actually, what brings me to this program is I have volunteered in a number of different program opportunities and activities with 501 Commons, and I'm finishing up a project now, and I thought, well, this looks interesting, and something that I might be able to apply some of the skills and techniques that I've gotten, for example, out of the Catalyst program. So I'm really here today to learn more about the program and see whether I'm a good fit for it and it's a good fit for me.
Well, thank you for taking the time, and thanks for sharing. Okay, I'm going to mute Linda and just go down the list here. Yeah, I did. Yep. Amy Stetson, are you?
Oh, I'm here.
Hi, welcome.
Oh, did you hear me?
We did.
Oh, because they told me I was in listen-only mode.
Well, I unmuted you so that you could introduce yourself. If you don't mind sharing a little bit about what brings you to the Pathways table.
Okay, my name is Amy Steffson. I am an employment lawyer and an employment coach. In my practice, I've done legal work, but also a lot of coaching, consulting, workplace investigating, training, etc. And in the course in particular of doing the coaching and investigating, I've learned a whole lot about organizations and how they work. I've also been in leadership positions and worked on staff in several nonprofits. So I bring all of that to bear.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, it looks like Ann Suter is muted, so is Bethany Otto. Jen Rudinsky, and I apologize if I'm not saying that correctly. Ooh. So Jen, I'm trying to unmute you. There we go, Jen Rudinsky. Sorry about that.
Ah, there I am. Okay. I have some experience with 501 Commons prior, so I've been working either as an executive coach or through the VIP program for probably 5 or 6 years. And so that's how I heard about Pathways. And what got me excited about Pathways was it aligns with previous assessment experience that I have done in the for-profit sector. And so I thought it was a great opportunity to combine past experience in a different industry, but also learn another layer that I could bring to my current practice as a consultant. So it's a little bit of sharing and hopefully a little bit of learning.
Well, thank you. Joan Reeder.
Hi, it's actually Joanne Ryder, but that's okay.
I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. I've been volunteering with 501 Commons for probably a year and a half, something like that, and I do mostly strategic planning and helping people figure out their mission, visions, and values and things like that, and I just thought this program looked like an interesting way to kind of expand what I was doing, so I just wanted to see what's going on.
Thank you. Catherine Ross, I think you're unmuted.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Hello. Okay, yeah, this is Catherine. So I just started volunteering for 501 Commons, and right now I'm actively doing the recruitment for the consultants and matching them to the projects for 501 Commons. My background, I've been volunteering for like 16 years, and most recently I'm on a board for an organization in the Snoqualmie Valley, and you know, I've done some board development, we've gone through strategic planning, and I'm active on the finance committee and things like that. And I just, previous job of mine, I was an auditor, an operations auditor, and I really enjoyed it, and I thought, you know, I would enjoy going out and consulting and using what I've learned with my board experience at 501 Commons. So I'm excited about the program, but I haven't done the consulting portion before, so I would prefer, you know, that you pair me up with someone that has consulted.
We absolutely are happy to do that. Thank you for giving it a try. Kathleen Pierce. Kathleen, I'll leave you unmuted in case you are able to speak up at some point. Susan, I think we have you unmuted as well. Susan Lennon.
Yes, I'm Susan Lennon. I come from a background of about 20 years of nonprofit experience. I've been volunteering on my first Catalyst project, and I'm interested in seeing what this type of consultation is about and seeing whether it's a good fit.
Great, thank you. And Yuli.
Hi, my name is Ulrike, or Uli for short. I'm with 501 Commons, I think, since 3 years, and I was working on several projects. I think till now 6 projects, and I have done the different programs, the Volunteer Impact Program, the Springboard Program for the arts organization, and at the moment I'm doing the Catalyst Program, which is actually very interesting. And when I saw about the Pathway Consultancy, I was thinking, that's a new project, and I would like to try it out. So here I am.
Thank you, and Weldon. Okay, I think I'm going to go back up one time through the list and just see if there's anyone that I missed that wants to share. Anne, are you able to join us?
Yes, I am. I'm sorry, I have 2 dogs in the room, and like children, they only bark when I'm on the phone. So,
We're dog friendly. We're okay with that.
I've been a volunteer for 501 Commons for probably 5 or 6 years, at least 3 years in Springboard and other organization consulting, which I continue to do. And I thought Pathways would be a good fit, probably more than the Springboard because of the more intense service time that's asked for.
Great, thank you. And Bethany, it looks like maybe you don't have access to sound. Greg, do you want to share? Greg Devers?
I can.
Hi.
Can you hear me? Do you hear me?
We can.
Oh, terrific. Okay. Audio. My name is Greg Devers. I'm a retiree, actually a nor'easter that moved to the Northwest about 10 years ago now. And my background is technology and technology management and retail and finance. And I worked for 3 large companies and then did 3 startups. One of the startups was a consulting firm, so I've done a fair amount of consulting in my past. And I'm signing up just because I thought maybe I could help out.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And Rich, it looks like you may not be connected to sound, so speak up if I am accidentally missing you. And then I think the only other person we haven't heard from is Kathleen. Are you able to chime in? Okay. Well, again, feel free to use the question box if you're having trouble navigating the sound, but I wanted to do a little test for everyone, but also just give you guys a chance to hear from each other. I'm always so impressed at the caliber of people that are willing to contribute their time and skills to these projects, and I think you will all really enjoy working with each other, so I'm excited to make matches amongst the group and start facilitating that get to know you process. So again, I just want to say thank you for your time and attention today. I recognize that it is a very important day for our country, and appreciate you taking a moment to also focus on this program and helping Seattle's nonprofit community before evening comes upon us. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the torch over to Nancy and have her talk about the 5 elements of a healthy nonprofit, and then my colleagues Carrie and Jim will have a chance to introduce themselves and talk about their specific pieces of this program later on. So we've got a little bit of a physical seat shuffling here that I'll wait to have them introduce themselves. Nancy, are you ready to go? Let me make sure that Nancy, can you try speaking?
Oh, yes. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Sorry about that.
Bethany and Rich, I think, need an audio pin, so that's been sent to them. So maybe check email in order to be able to speak to us. And then just reminding people that you can always type a message into chat. So if we're not able to hear you or you have yourself muted because of the situation you're in, just type in a message via chat, and we'll be watching that. So thank you for joining us this afternoon. What you see on your screen now is a visual depiction of our model for creating a healthy nonprofit. This is something that we have been using for many years. Goes back to about 2011 when we rolled it out, and it's intended to be a vehicle for kind of calming down all of the expectations that we place on nonprofits and all the things we tell nonprofit professionals that they need to do. It's based on research into all aspects of organizational capacity, looking at research in the sector about what kind of capacity really results in effectiveness in a nonprofit and so forth. And what this does is give organizations sort of a simple model for thinking about all the complex requirements that they have on them, and hopefully allow them to create a more planful way to raise their organization's capacity. It also highlights aspects of capacity that often receive little attention from leadership, like culture, relationships, technology, and financial management. And so you can see in the way that this is constructed, there's some balance between those things that are pretty high on people's attention list, like governance and boards, which is always right at the top. And those things, and things like fundraising or communications, and then it sort of partners those things in with essential related elements that often get less attention, like technology, culture, financial management, and relationships. Jan, you want to advance the slide? What the 5-element self-assessment does is it uses this model and it breaks down, excuse me, it breaks down for each of those 5 areas 10 to 12 standards that we think are indicative of whether or not the organization has capacity in those areas. They're not exhaustive. In fact, those standards were developed by us going to very detailed assessment tools that we've been using for a long time in areas like technology or HR or around volunteerism. And any of you who've done our other programs know that those cohort programs generally start with a self-assessment, and those self-assessments are often, 50 to 70 questions. So in this case, we have boiled it down to, 4 or 5 questions, or at most, 12 questions, or not questions, but standards that that the organization is going to respond to. So there's inevitably some holes in what people think would be important in these standards, but we did that work to kind of boil it down, get to sets of standards that we think really indicate that the organization is managing risk and setting itself up to capture opportunity in each of these areas. The 10 to 12 standards are then further broken down into 12, the 5 elements area with 10 to 12 standards is then further broken down into 12 subsections. And the intention of the tool, which is available for free on our website, is both to be educational, because the tool describes the standard and then describes how the stages might look for implementing that standard, and aspirational, because it shows kind of the best level of implementation of the standard that we would all aspire to. It's not expected or intended that organizations would always get high scores in every standard, because some things are more important in an organization than others, and some of the standards may not be important for all organizations. The self-assessment tool will allow us to collect data, and over time, when enough data is collected, we can actually give organizations benchmarks, so they can benchmark themselves against other nonprofits or their peers in terms of size or subsector of organization. Over the long run, we also hope that this process that we're rolling out with you will form the basis for a certification process that would allow us to prove to donors and funders that they have that an organization has a high level of organizational capacity. And this is important because many of you know that the way in which donors and funders currently evaluate whether an organization is fund-worthy, worthy of a donation, or worthy of a grant, is often by looking at overhead percentage. And that is exactly the wrong statistic to have them use. It's causing serious gaps in the way that nonprofits implement technology and the way that they fund and support human resources in their organization, volunteer management in their organization. Organizations are essentially being incentivized to starve themselves of the management capacity that they need to be effective. So our very aspirational goal is that we can make it possible for donors to have a score other than the overhead percentage score as their metric for a good organization, by letting people go through this self-assessment process, and then when they feel like they are ready to go through a certification process, we would actually go in and certify that the results they're getting on the self-assessment are supported by evidence or research into the organization. So that's the sort of very aspirational goal behind the self-assessment. What you have now is an example of how the self-assessment works. It delivers a standard and then gives 5 levels for how that standard might be evidenced in an organization. The first level is the lowest level and generally represents that the organization is not meeting the standard or not doing the things that are required to meet the standard. And then 2 and 3, there's got some pieces of it, but not all of it. 4 is the top level where essentially the standard is met. And then 5 is not applicable for those few things, as I mentioned, that Are you hearing me, Jan, okay?
I am now. I'm sorry. I was trying to cut out the background noise and accidentally muted you as well. So my apologies. We heard you get to the 4th standard.
Okay. Yeah, so the 4th standard is the highest level where the standard is actually met, and then 5th is for organizations to use if it's not applicable to them. We ask organizations to choose the level that best describes their current practice or behavior, but we also encourage them to be conservative in choosing that. In other words, if they have some of the elements of 2, but they also have some of the elements of 3, their score would be 2. And that's part of the, the developmental kind of process here. 3 tells them what else they need to do. They can pick up that additional piece, do that additional implementation, and then next time they take the assessment, there'll be a 3 and so forth. So there's a natural kind of ladder for success for organizations as they move up the scores in the standards. Here's another example with an employee handbook, and you'll see that this is similar in that it describes all the kind of critical components of an employee handbook in the standard, and then the 1 through 4 is kind of working your way to that level of having all of those elements or the majority of those elements, and also having the handbook be revised and up to date. So that's an example of how each of these standards will look. When they have completed the self-assessment, they will get a report that shows the levels that they have chosen for each standard to just feed back to them with their own choices. And they will see that outlined by both sub-area and averages for the 5 elements. So they'll have an individual score, a sub-score, and a 5-element score. This will be depicted also in a bar graph. Go ahead. Yeah, in a bar graph, which you see here, and gives an organization a kind of a quick snapshot for how they're doing on each of the 5 elements and the sub-elements below them. It's important that we not let organizations overreact to this representation. It's useful. It's it's visual and helpful, but the lowest elements on the self-assessment are not necessarily the areas that the organization needs to focus on. They really need to go through a process of discerning where there's the greatest opportunity for improvement, where if they focus their attention and their time and resources, they can get the most benefit. So it may be that they want to take something where they have an intermediate score like a 2.5 and try to move that forward, or even something that's a 3 that they want to move forward. But what they should recognize, and you can help remind them, is that in some of the areas where they have lower scores, having lower scores means having some risk to the organization. So they may not think, for instance, that reviewing their technology and making sure their technology is up to date and that they're being careful about data security, being careful about privacy, those sorts of things are critical for the organization. They're not the things they most want to work on. But if they should have a breach and violate their clients' or their donors' privacy, that's going to have a big impact on the organization. Similar with HR, they may not think HR is where they want to focus their attention, but if they're not following labor laws and they get sued, they're going to wish they had, they had shored that up and met those basic requirements and managed that risk. So there's a tension there, and this is where you, as consultants, can really help the organization. The issues that they decide to work on, that they're going to give the most attention to, should be areas where they can make some progress and really make a difference in the capacity of their organization. But they need to also recognize that there are risks around having scores below 4 in most of these areas for most organizations. As you participate in Pathways, we welcome your feedback on the standards as we've described them, on the way that the levels are described, and on the recommendations that we will be giving you in a draft form to work with and to help us revise. We won't be making changes to the standards right away. We've gone through 2 rounds of doing pilot testing with this tool, where we were doing kind of usability testing approach to getting to the best articulation of the standards. And Eric and or Weldon and Kathleen and maybe someone else on this call too has been involved in that earlier stage. And so we're going to hold those standards steady for a while until we've completed this Pathways pilot, done some more peer review, and collected some more surveys. So then we can make all the changes at the same time. But certainly let us know if something just doesn't seem to work, particularly if organizations struggle with understanding the standard, and let us know if the levels seem to be problematic as organizations choose their level. We are going to be providing you with some recommendations that would go for each of the standards and each of the levels, so that's a rather complex task that is underway. And so staff are going to be preparing some preliminary recommendations, and we'll be providing those to you, but we really want your help in further developing and revising those recommendations. You will know of other resources, you'll have insight into what has worked from your previous experience and practices, and so we're asking you to feed all that back to us so that we can make these tools stronger, particularly the recommendations stronger at the end of this process than they are at the beginning. So I'm going to stop and see if there's any questions about how the assessment is put together.
And if you could either type your question into the chat box, or there's a little button that signifies that your hand is raised. If you want to click on that and I can unmute you. I'm having a hard time opening the quintessential question box. I see a few folks had questions about their ability to speak. But if you could raise your hand, I'll know to unmute you. I'm just going to look down the list to see. Ooh, I see a hand raised. Amy, thank you. You are unmuted.
Okay, thank you. I'm not quite sure how this works as a logistical, practical matter. Is this a survey that's sent to the nonprofit? They fill it out online and you prepare a preliminary report, or what?
Jan will be running through all of that, so she'll be running through the process. But one thing for you to know is that it is on our website right now, and it's free for any organization to use, and it is an online tool. What you're going to be doing is a little bit more complicated because you're going to be working alongside the organization. And if you visit, so if you go to the Assess section of our website, the top navigation is the section where it presents this assessment tool. And it explains that there are, currently it describes 2 levels where ways that people can use the self-assessment tool. One is they can just go online and one person can just complete the assessment and that's it, and they'll get the scores back and they can work with that. The better way to do it is that they do it with a team in their organization. And for those of you who've been in any of our cohort programs, that's what you've experienced, where a team gets together and reviews the assessment tool and then talks about what the scores are, and you get a lot deeper understanding in the organization. You get more reliable information out of that process. So we consider that a better process than just one individual taking the using the self-assessment. The third way, which is not currently talked about on the website because we're doing this pilot, but the third way they can use the tool is they can do the self-assessment as a group, and then they can work with you as consultants to help them discern what areas of the self-assessment results they want to focus on, how they could make improvements across all the areas, and just what ways they can implement change in order to increase their scores and increase their organizational capacity. So there's the process that's available right now, and then there's the process that Pathways is presenting, and Jan will run you through exactly what happens when.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Anyone else? Oh, Weldon, I am going to unmute you. You're unmuted.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
This is Weldon. I've been muted until just now, so I just wanted to raise my hand to get unmuted. Thank you.
Okay.
Weldon, you didn't get a chance.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Did you want to introduce yourself since you didn't have a chance before?
Hello?
We can hear you. Okay. Having a few technical difficulties here. Bethany, I am unmuting you.
Perfect. So I typed my question in the question box, but I have a question on reading the graph, so if you could go back to it. And that's also, I looked at the discussion points in this. So we're seeing here element 1, element 2, element 3. When I look at the self-assessment instructions, it actually has element 1 as just a standard, and there isn't any way to go deeper and read more about that. So my question is this: are the elements a roll-up of the questions underneath? I'm assuming so, but I wanted to confirm. So if I'm reading this graph right, element 1, governance and boards, this is their overall score for government and boards. But they've got 2 areas that they could go deep: board effectiveness and board and executive relations. And those are the specific scores of the groups of those questions.
Yes, there are some.
That's how I'm reading it? Okay. So is there a view?
A better example would be element 2, where it's the element is made up of fundraising and financial management. So you can see that there's an overall score for all the standards in that element, and then it breaks it out by fundraising and financial management.
Perfect. So there could be 2 different views. Essentially, people could see where it would just show the elements, and then it could show the elements with the breakdown.
Yeah, so they could see, for instance, that maybe they have a score of 2.5 on element 2, fundraising and financial management.
Yeah.
But that's made up of a score of 4 on financial management and a score of 1 on fundraising.
Okay.
So, it
makes sense.
It demonstrates where that overall score is coming from, what the contributors are to that overall score.
Yep. And in the case where if they weren't worried about that area, it doesn't matter if their score is low, but it would show that the overall score was low because this area was low.
Yeah, and you want to, I think probably all of us who've worked with nonprofits are aware one of the problems is people don't necessarily worry about the right stuff. So you often have to prod people a little bit to think again about what are the risks of not paying attention to an area that is low. And it's this tension. It's why you as consultants are such a great contributor to this process, and people are using this tool with your assistance, because you can help them calculate those trade-offs of what happens if you're not paying attention to something where you've got some unmanaged risks, but maybe there's not a lot of enthusiasm or interest in the organization in that area, versus if you're paying attention to something like boards and fundraising, which pretty much everybody wants to pay attention to. And so people need to, they need to be thinking about this from a standpoint of trying to understand where they're going to get the most value out of paying attention to the results, and also where they have the most risk. The other issue is that some things will be very easy for them to do once they just realize that they aren't currently doing what they need to do. So, they're not currently meeting the standard. They can read the standard and see what they need to do and simply start doing it. And some things will be that simple, since many of the tasks involved don't really need a lot of additional resource. Other things will be outside of their reach, or they're going to have to plan for them, or they're going to have to get resources for them.
Okay. So a follow-up question if we have time. In the self-assessment instructions, it says that there are some areas that they may not deem as important, but you do go into the depth of kind of what you touched on here of be careful of the areas that you've deemed unimportant, because there might actually be unforeseen risks. Is there a way for them to communicate that to us in the self-assessment, that they don't use volunteers, and so obviously their use of volunteers is really low?
Well, they can choose on any question to just say it's not relevant. So if, in the case of volunteers, if they literally have no volunteers, they would just answer 5 and say that's not a section that applies to them.
So that's how we should interpret it when we're reading it then, is if they mark 5, it's not that they deem it unimportant, it's that they don't use it, but there's no way to communicate that they deem this unimportant.
Right, so that will come through the conversation.
Okay.
There's a tool you'll see in a little bit that Carrie has developed to help get at that issue of how you balance the difference in the score to the standard level, what their score is to what the standard would be, and what level of importance they give to the issue. So we want you folks to be advocates on behalf of the 5 elements, and to really encourage organizations to be aspirational about raising their scores in all of the 5 elements that are relevant to them. But you, in the end, will also help them figure out where to focus their time and effort.
Thanks so much for that.
Okay, any other questions before we move on? I think we're going to delve a little bit more into the details of the process. So some of this might become evident as you go, but of course, if there's any questions about the assessment or how it's structured, what we're trying to accomplish with it, feel free to raise your hand.
Again, I'm trying to, I'm not sure why, but that people seem to keep going on mute, and they may be putting themselves on mute, but every now and then I'm trying to just unmute everybody so that people can speak up if they need to.
Okay.
So, anybody?
I keep doing that. Sorry, I'm trying to find the button where I can unmute everyone, and every time I do that, it mutes everyone, including Nancy. So, Nancy, if you're able to manage the mute, I'll unmute everyone, and then I'll let you kind of pay attention to when we need to have it quieter. Does that work?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
I apologize, everyone, as we kind of work out the kinks of technology. I love that this saves everyone from having to drive, but then there's the downside of technology. So, okay, we'll move along, and it looks like now everyone can speak freely, so feel free to chime in as you have questions. I think a good majority of you have participated in our cohort programs in the past, so this general model shouldn't be completely unfamiliar to you. the thing to keep in mind about this program is it's a series of four meetings. The meetings are slightly different than our standard cohort program. It's definitely a much more condensed program, and you have a greater leadership role throughout the program. So we're clearly at the consultant orientation. We are actually hoping that you will meet with a leader within the organization to launch the project. So the first planning will be just you with the lead within your organization, the client organization that you're matched with, and we'll go into detail a little bit about what's entailed in that meeting. The second is when everyone who has filled out the assessment comes together and discusses their responses, and you'll facilitate that meeting and debrief the results. The third could be those same people that participate in the assessment, but it could just be the chosen person at the organization who's here to lead the process. You'll work with at least one person, maybe more, depending on what the organization wants to do, to identify their priorities and weigh those strengths and weaknesses and figure out how to leverage your time and expertise to their greatest advantage. And then the fourth is where you'll take those identified priorities, do a little research, work with us to develop some recommendations, and then present them to the lead. Again, there may be more people involved in this conversation, but at the very least, it'll be the lead designated by the organization to participate in the entire process. So a series of four planning meetings. What's not on this is that we hope to bring all of the consultants together at two pivotal moments within the program to get your feedback on the process and just hear from you how it's working and what we might improve upon in the future. And that is when a good number of folks have participated in the assessment and debrief conversation. So after the second meeting, and then again after the fourth meeting, after you've had a chance to meet with organizations and provide recommendations. And we don't know what those dates are going to be yet. We are just starting to do the client outreach for this program, and so we expect that the majority of projects will be done on a rolling launch between now and the end of January 31st. And so we'll try to gauge, again, when a good number of projects have reached that point, and invite you all to participate in the conversation with us. And we hope that you'll take the time to share your feedback with us. Again, we have some of our greatest tried and true consultants on this webinar, and that were here in our office last week. They've agreed to participate in this pilot, and so we really hope that you'll share your feedback with us and help us build upon what we've drafted here today. So just a brief high-level overview, of what we're hoping the consultants will do throughout this process. Again, you're much more in a leadership role, facilitating the entire experience for the organization, including launching the actual project itself. And so we're hoping that you'll take some time to get to know the organization before the initial phone conversation to launch the effort, and then talk with them on the phone, be curious about their organization, their leadership structure, get to know them and their unique needs so that we can meet them where they're at and provide recommendations that are going to help them move the needle in a positive way. You'll want to work with a client to figure out who should participate in the process and what they might need to do to get the most out of the assessment process. So we're leaving it up to the organization to decide who it makes the most sense to participate. Ideally, there would be good representation amongst staff and leadership, maybe even the board, to get different perspectives. Not every organization may be in the place to do that. They may have a different decision-making process, whatever the case may be, but we do want to encourage them to invest the time in taking the assessment, having a thorough conversation about it with your leadership and facilitation, and pause to get everyone's gut sense in terms of what they think might be the organization's greatest priorities, just so that there's an opportunity for everyone to be heard. Again, we're leaving it up to the organization in terms of who's going to make the decisions around priorities in that third planning meeting, but we do want to create the avenue for more voices to be heard and to get them out of this process. So the second meeting, we're hoping that we'll have greater participation than the majority of the other meetings. We will ask you to schedule and facilitate all the meetings, again, making it easy for the organization to get through the process. We don't anticipate that it will be a huge number of hours for the organization, especially if they don't have too many people participating in the first, third, and fourth meetings. But we are expecting it should be probably about 12 to 15 hours per consultant. We'll be matching the consultants together based on strengths and experience, and we'll identify a point person to be the lead person that we'll reach out to just to get get status updates and whatnot. But we'll ask you to work together as a team to research the topics that come up, work with our team here in-house at 501 Commons, who might specialize on the particular needs that the organization has identified, as well as relying on your own expertise and experience to provide those recommendations. So we'll in the coming weeks, I'll be matching consultants and then do some email introductions so that you have a chance to connect with your partner and get to know their skill sets and figure out how you might want to work together as a team, which parts it makes sense for each of you to take the lead on, and be prepared to meet with the client once we have the ability to match you with the particular organizations that express interest. We are starting this pilot with organizations that have worked with us in the last 2 years, and so we have about 300 organizations or so that we're doing personalized outreach to and encouraging them to participate between now and the end of January. We, thanks to the Satterberg Foundation, we're able to offer this service free of charge to the first 25 organizations. So it's a great opportunity for them to take advantage of this resource while they can for free, and learn about their strengths and opportunities and have your guidance. And we're hoping, expecting that it will also help us to be able to serve them more holistically and just know how to, again, meet them where they're at and customize our services to meet their particular situations. So we are excited about the opportunity. I think Nancy touched on the 5 elements, and again, it is natural for people to gravitate toward one element over another just based on their experience and comfort level. And so we're hoping that you will also be a champion for the 5 elements, that the standards are in the assessment because we think they're important and they're worth an intentional conversation whether or not they should be flagged as a top priority in the moment. So,
I have a quick question. You're looking for, this is Amy, 100 organizations to sign up for this?
I'm sorry, I think you asked how many organizations. 25 between now and the end of January.
Oh, okay. It was 100 total over time, but only 25 for the first round.
We have a goal of having 100 fill out the assessment in and of itself, and then having 25 go through the actual pathways process. So being able to take advantage of that additional personalized consulting. But we're thinking that the assessment in and of itself is educational as well as aspirational, and will help organizations understand where they might need to invest a little bit more time.
Thank you.
And with that said, we have about 30 consultants signed up, which is a generous, wonderful number of people, but there is opportunity for more people to participate. So we're certainly only asking and expecting that each consultant will take on one project between now and the end of January. But if you have extra capacity or are very interested in taking on more, that is totally great. Let me know. But if you know of someone else that might have the skill set needed to effectively serve nonprofits that might see the value and benefit from being a part of this program, please let me know. We will need a few more people to help us meet the goal by the end of January. So. And Nancy, I see a funny sign. Is everything still working on your end?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Great. Okay, so you are probably all familiar with this list of behaviors that build trust. It's something that we share through our guide to coaches and consultants. When you first start with 501 Commons, and it's something we reiterate at the start of every program, it is a list of behaviors that we've learned over the years are necessary to build trust with clients. And you are all part of this conversation and been invited to this program because we know that you have successfully demonstrated trust with your clients and have been successful. So instead of preaching to the choir, I was hoping this would be a good opportunity for us to hear about some of your successes and for folks to chime in the conversation. So I was hoping that we could just kind of go down the list, and if people wouldn't mind just sharing a consulting or a service that you've provided to a stakeholder in which you were able to demonstrate one of these particular behaviors, or where you saw that this behavior was helpful in managing that situation or in providing service to the stakeholder. So I think I included a note to think about your previous experience and be willing to share. So is anyone willing to talk about a moment in which they either saw it was needed to be a patient listener and to not jump to conclusions, or a time in which they were able to successfully demonstrate that, and just share a little bit about that experience and what you saw happen as a result?
This is Amy.
Thank you, Amy.
All right. I having been, and I stopped doing them about 2 weeks ago, but having been an investigator, I'm looking at patient, listener, learner. I think, and let's see, speak the client's language. I think a lot of what really helps is to be, and this is true of a coach, but this is also true of an investigator, to be very curious about who they are, what they do, what their terminology is, at the same time to guide the conversation. I think you really need to have a kind of a set of questions, an agenda to make sure it's not just stream of consciousness and that you get what you need. So I see it as very friendly, investigative type process at the beginning, where you're really interested and you're really friendly, but you're really pulling information out of them because people may not know what's important or what to tell you, or they may go off on a tangent or whatever. So I'm not afraid to guide the conversation, let's put it that way.
That's great.
Hi, Jan.
Hi.
I guess you finally unmuted me, so I've been going back and forth between phone and computer. So what I agree that listening is key, but I think along with it, while listening, key is probing questions based upon what we've heard with the clients. And when they hear the feedback, then they're really become more trusting of the consultants.
I agree with probing questions.
They're learning to trust that you hear them and you understand them. That is great. Does anyone have any particular experience about figuring out how to speak the client's language?
Oh, yeah, all the time, every time.
I think you just ask questions. I mean, you follow up, you listen. I have found that people, you know, I mean, again, going back to an investigative experience, is that they have told me at the end, I was not going to tell you anything. And then, you know, 2 hours later, because you're friendly and kind and interested and following up and curious, people want to talk. And if you just guide it and follow up as needed with probing questions in a nice way, it really works.
This is Susan. Right now in my Catalyst experience, we have a difficult client, and we spent a lot of time with a lot of circular conversations that sort of don't move forward. And it's difficult, I think, sometimes as the consultant not to jump to conclusions and to be patient. And you know, I've learned a lot about that over the course of this particular assignment, because, you know, frankly, my partner and I both think that this nonprofit may be on extremely shaky ground, and to really work them through the process without making those judgments in a way that may help them to figure out how to move forward has been challenging.
That's great. So trying to keep an open mind, and I think it's important to not only talk about their weaknesses, but really identify their strengths, compliment them, help them understand that, appreciate their strengths, so that it's not all about being vulnerable and needing something to fix. That there's something there to build upon always feels good.
Yes, it's true, and in this particular case, there's not a lot to build on, and so we have allowed them to direct the conversation, always future-oriented and not necessarily what's been holding them back.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Future strengths. Anyone else have any stories that they'd like to share, or just anything on this list that you really identify with that you think is incredibly important for the work that we're doing?
This is Anne. So a couple of things that came to mind were talking about culture of the organization. Particularly, I've learned over a period of time that different kinds of groups really do have different cultures, and part of that also reflects where they're coming from in their particular organizational world. So it took me a long time to actually, I don't want to say cope, but enjoy the work I was doing with one organization, because they were really very fluid in the way they did their business already. Mm-hmm. And they wanted to be at a different place, but they did not want to manage to the next level, and couldn't really for lots of different reasons. But it worked out okay in the end. The other thing was really important is literally the numbers of people. How many people are really on the board and how many people are really on the staff makes a total difference in the way the organization views itself and in, frankly, its capacity. Mm-hmm. So that, a lot of times they just want everything to happen all at one time, but really are not going to ever be capable of it at that stage of their development or their people capacities, really. I do like to, and I still do, follow back with almost every organization I've ever worked with. I, periodically send them something. And the other thing I do is ask to be put on their mailing list, because then that gives me a different picture, and I want them to really feel good that I'm invested in them and want to know how they present themselves to others and what they're doing. And last but not least, it's always been invaluable to me to talk to every board member one-on-one on a telephone. Mm-hmm. It's easier in a way to listen because I don't have any other cues in front of me, visual cues. But more importantly, I've learned some things in that were not ever presented on the outset of the consulting experience. So those are my few little things to share.
Interesting. Thank you. We won't prolong this. Oh, go ahead, Nancy.
I just want to mention that the system shows Bill, Jen, and Catherine as being self-muted, which is just fine, but if you're wishing to join the conversation, you need to unmute yourself on your end. We don't have control of your mute, and maybe that your audio is muted. And type up on the question box if you don't have access to sound.
This is Amy. What I think Anne just said leads me to a question, which is, in this particular process, are we, to keep it efficient, and what do we do about getting sort of a partial view of what's going on in the organization? Because it's totally true, there are always multiple levels and multiple perspectives. We're not doing, a whole assessment of interviewing everybody who works there or everybody on the board, or are we? Or how do we deal with that issue of only hearing from the people who may not have the whole story?
I think it's great to encourage the lead that you're working with to think about who in their midst should be part of the conversation, who either has experience on the particular topics in the assessment, or who is a good voice on the board, or just has good insights in terms of how to strengthen the organization. It is great if you can encourage them to embrace this process and include a diverse slate of perspectives. But we're not asking for any minimum criteria. I think, frankly, if they just want one person to participate, well, they can fill out the assessment themselves, and they don't necessarily need facilitation, obviously. So it's wasted resource to just have one person participating through this process. But yeah, it's great if you could encourage them to have a good good representation amongst their leadership staff or staff members or yeah, board members, etc.
Is there just one form that's filled out by however many participants there are, or each one fills out a form?
Yeah, I'll talk about that in just a minute. We will ask people to download the assessment themselves and fill out a hard copy of it and then bring it to a meeting, and then through your facilitation agree upon a score for each of the individual standards, and then weigh in on their kind of gut instincts about their priorities before the next meeting where the official decisions are made.
Okay. Something people should be aware of, though, is that the way that the tool works, it is possible for people to skip questions that they don't know the answer to, and then just, save their results until they go and talk to somebody about that issue. So that might come up around finance or technology or other kind of HR, other specialized areas that whoever is filling out the assessment needs to check what the organization is doing with someone within their organization. The other thing is that these standards are not things you'd expect a board to know in most cases. Obviously, the board would have an opinion on the board and governance area, and could be helpful. Board members or the board chair could be helpful in responding to that section of the assessment. But frankly, if board members knew whether or not the organizations were doing all the other standards or meeting all the other standards, I'd be worried about how involved the board is in the organization and what their focus is. So it's more a matter of getting the right voices on the right topics than some kind of a kumbaya experience, right? Not looking for consensus or averages. What we're trying to do is get a conversation where the voices that are necessary because they have knowledge of the organization are being tapped into, and that can happen through the process that Dan's about to explain to you. It can also happen by just checking in with whoever the organization's expert is to find out where they're in that process.
Okay, that helps.
Thanks for that clarification, Nancy. I'll move along to the process just because it sounds. Oh, go ahead.
I have a question. This is Weldon. What are the organizations going to be told that sign up for this Pathways process? What are they coming into this project with? What expectations do they have?
I mean, that's an interesting question, and I think the process that I'll talk through is essentially the majority of what we're saying is they should walk away with a greater understanding of where they are in relation to a series of standards, and then they'll have the opportunity to prioritize a few things that they would like some additional consulting on. So I think Nancy touched on before that they don't, if they're probably through this process, they will learn of some simple things that they can do themselves to move themselves up the ladder. And so just being thoughtful around where they might like to take advantage of your additional consulting. And so they'll walk away with a memo, so to speak, of recommendations that are tailored to their particular situation and goals that will help them get a sense of where to go, and then resources and links to information that will support them through that process. Nancy, is there anything that you would want to add to that?
The other thing is they are being told this is a relatively short engagement, so about 20 hours. Is that right, Jan, that we're expecting for the volunteers?
Yeah, about 12 to 15 each. I think it'll end up being about 24, 30 or so altogether.
Okay, yeah. And of course less time for the organization. So yes. It's called Pathways, with an intention. We've actually been doing this kind of a process for some time, just not with this tool. So it's not intended that you are walking all the way down the road with them. You're not going to go to the destination. You're not going to, help them all along the way. You're not going to carry them down the road. You're just going to help them find their own pathway. So there will be a piece where you step off of, off of the path and let them continue on. Having done the assessment, having done the conversation, having, a chance to think about priorities and importance to each of the elements and deciding where they are going to focus their time and effort. And then if they want additional consultation or additional advice, they can come back and ask for that. But you're not trying to get them through an implementation process, only through that kind of discernment process of deciding what they want to prioritize and where they're going to focus their attention.
Yeah, I understand that, and I appreciate that. But having participated in the early beta testing of the assessment, I encourage us all to try and get multiple people out of the organization involved, because part of what the assessment tool will identify, hopefully, is that where there may be mismatches, miscommunications, and misunderstandings between even staff members or staff and board members as to where the status is of the organization. And those are very important pieces of information.
And well, then I may have misunderstood your original question. I think we are setting up the expectation that there would be multiple people who would participate in this Pathways pilot. We leave it open to just have one person participate online if they want to do that. But the expectation, and there may be an organization that in some way can't meet that expectation, or where the participation of others would be fairly limited. But I expect most of these will be organizations where they will want to have multiple people involved.
Okay, I misunderstood what you said earlier then, because it implied that some organizations might have only one person involved, and that's going to be problematical.
In that case, they can just do it online, and some people may choose to do that.
Definitely, one of the benefits that we're sharing with organizations is just the objective perspective of the consultants and the facilitation that comes with the opportunity of working with you. That is definitely a valuable process that they should take advantage of. So I'm going to keep going because we'll have not lots of time, but some time to talk about any questions that pop up as we get through the actual process. So hold your questions for just a moment. Let me get off this slide. But my last comment about this is just to note that we ask clients to evaluate the consultants based on these list of behaviors at the end of every assignment, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And then we also ask the consultants to evaluate themselves. And on average, we receive on a scale of 1 to 4, most of our consultants get about a 3.74 on average. So highly rated consultants. I have no great concerns in this area, but just wanted the chance to be intentional about it, as well as have the opportunity for you to share. So thanks for humoring me there for a moment. Okay, so we're going to dig into the process and get into some of the details of the actual meetings. And again, feel free to chime in and ask questions as we go. I'm not sure if you're able to see, but I did upload a couple of handouts to support this process. And ultimately, all of the resources for this program will be on Basecamp. You'll also have access to each other on Basecamp. And I'll post some videos there if you haven't used Basecamp before. But you should have access to, on your screen, the assessment instructions that will be shared with organizations prior to you ever having a conversation with them. And then we have some templates for the 4 meetings that we anticipate will be happening through this process. You're welcome to edit them as you see fit, but we tried to make it as easy as possible for you to kind of get through the program and put your good thinking skills to work on providing those recommendations, not have to worry about formatting and all that good stuff. So so you have this as a reference now, and again, you'll have access to them on Basecamp. So just know that those resources are available to you. So the first meeting, so clients will express interest, and I'll have an initial phone conversation with them about the opportunity to kind of make sure that we're on the same page in terms of what they might get out of it, and make sure that it's a fit for them where they're at in the moment. They'll sign a contract and again be given the instructions for the assessment. And then we're hoping that you will schedule a 1-hour phone consultation with the designated lead and take a moment to get to know them before that meeting, kind of do your homework on the basics, check out their website, their 990, find out what is said about them online so that when you're in that meeting, you can really dig deeper and get to know them a little bit and get a sense of why they're participating and what they're hoping to get out of this opportunity. So we have the high-level agenda about for that first meeting. Again, it's introductory. We're hoping that you can get to know them, ask for follow-up materials that might help you as you learn more about their strengths and weaknesses. You might consider taking a look at their financial reports, an audit if they have it, their strategic plan, and then discussing the assessment process. So we will post these slides on Basecamp so that you have access to them if you need a little bit more background information to share. If they have questions about the assessment, again, help them figure out who it might make sense to participate in the assessment, as well as who might make sense to participate in the planning, or excuse me, in the decision-making process in the third meeting, and then who should be a part of the recommendations when you get to that point and are ready to point them on their way. Any questions about that initial meeting? I hope that's pretty straightforward. But
is there a reason why you have it by phone instead of an in-person option? This is Amy.
Yeah, it is entirely up to you how you want to handle it. We were originally trying to make this a pretty brief consulting opportunity just to provide you with a more diverse assignment than our normal 4 to 6 months, 10 to 12 hours a month opportunity. And so there's a couple elements that we added on and realized that the commitment was a little bit greater than we originally anticipated. So we're trying to save you the travel time, to be frank. And so whatever you are comfortable with. I do think the second planning meeting is best done in person. Obviously, it's hard to facilitate a group if you can't read their facial expressions and fully engage in the conversation. But I think if a phone consultation is needed at some point in time, this first meeting is a good time to lean on technology. But great if you can be there in person as well.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay. Again, in anticipation of working with you, the organization will be given the same instructions that you have access to or will have access to on Basecamp if you can't download them now. We're asking for the team members to print out a hard copy of the survey and circle their responses, as well as note their initial thoughts in terms of what might be a priority for the organization to address. The second planning meeting will get into greater detail in terms of why they thought what they thought, and we're hoping that you'll help the team come to consensus on the score for each of the individual standards. And so that will take a good majority of the time. But again, this might be the main opportunity that we have to hear from as many people as are in this meeting. And so we're hoping that you can save a little bit of time at the end of the meeting to quickly touch base on everyone's priorities and get a sense from everyone within the group so that you have that context and background information when it does come to the priority setting process. So again, through this meeting, we're hoping that you can help the team come to consensus on all of the individual scores, and then one particular person within the organization will need to capture that scores. I will have given them a personalized online survey link so that they can enter their actual scores, but we want those to be the finalized scores that the organization comes to agreement on. So someone will need to take notes and take the lead on doing that. And then once we have those scores down the road, those will serve as a great benchmark for organizations that go through this process, improve the things that they're able to improve or that are needed in the moment, and then if they want to circle back and do it again 2-3 years from now, it will still be there. It'll be attached to their profile within our Salesforce database. So we do want to make sure that we capture those scores at the end. And go ahead.
I'm completely confused.
Okay.
After meeting 1,
yep.
Do they fill out the form or no? That's not yet. That's what meeting 2 is setting up.
So the meeting one is for you to kind of introduce the program verbally. They'll already have the instructions for the assessment, but that first conversation is there for you to answer any questions they may have about the assessment. They may be curious about who should fill it out, and so you can have that conversation with them in the first planning meeting. And then the process is that then everyone who is intended to fill out the survey will download the actual survey and circle their scores before the second planning meeting so that
so they're not submitting it yet. This is the process of coming up with one form, one tool.
Right. So this is how we're collecting individual responses, and then that second planning meeting will be for the team to share their perspectives and different scores and come to consensus on how they're actually doing in each of the different standards. And then someone will document those results and then enter them online as the finalized agreed upon scores for the organizations, after that meeting.
All right. Okay.
And if I could step in for a second, the reason why it's done that way is you don't want to have people just individually on their own entering the scores and then just simply averaging the results.
Yeah, right.
It turns the results to garbage because you have people, taking a guess at a standard that they're not that familiar with. So people are prepping for that assessment review meeting by going through the assessment themselves and answering in those areas where they have personal knowledge and expertise. And then coming together, and in many cases they will have the same opinion about any of the standards, and in some cases there will be a difference. And Weldon was speaking earlier to the value of understanding and recognizing those differences, where if you just put people's scores online, spit out the average of the score, you're missing that whole process and potentially getting average results that don't really mean anything.
Okay. And if people disagree, then you go for the lower score.
Well, you have a conversation. So they may disagree because they're just uninformed, or if there really is a difference of opinion, somebody thinks, well, we're a 3, and somebody else goes, no, absolutely we're not, we're a 1, then there's a conversation that needs to happen. Ultimately, they have to, fairly quickly. I mean, there's 58 questions, 58 standards, so they have to go through pretty quickly. But they'll need to agree. And the bias should always be to the lower score.
Okay.
So the third meeting is to start talking about the priorities. So as I mentioned earlier, it'll be up to the organization to decide who should be a part of this conversation. The lead, ED, whoever ends up playing that role may or may not want a large number of people involved, but definitely the opportunity is there. It's up to them to decide who participates in this discussion. So if you haven't had a chance to debrief the assessment discussion, it might make sense to just touch on it quickly, just get their perspectives on how it went. Were there any surprises? Were there things, a few things confirmed? Did they have a good sense of where they might be heading in terms of priorities? Before we get to a bit more objective way of prioritization. And Carrie Kozicki, our Director of Consulting Management Services, put together a great matrix for weighing both what the aggregated scores are for the elements, as well as and balancing that with the level of importance it is to the organization. So I'm going to have him talk about that tool, and I'm going to pull it up here so you can see what the actual tool is. And this tool is meant to, again, provide some structure to weighing different priorities. Again, I think we all gravitate toward what we know or what we're more comfortable with, and this is a way of looking at it a little bit more objectively and framing the decision-making process. So I'm going to pull this up and pass it to Carrie.
Thanks, Jan. Good afternoon, everybody. Basically, for those of you that are familiar with Excel and also the concept of a prioritization matrix, let me give you kind of an overview of the intent here. So first of all, let me explain how the spreadsheet works. It'll make more sense to you once we get into these, into the matrix. So the way the spreadsheet is set up is that for each subsection of the 5 elements assessment, we ask that you put the average score for each subsection in the row indicated. That score will come up with what would be deemed a suboptimal score. That suboptimal score, if you can look up in the formula bar, is 4, which is the best score one can achieve in each subsection, minus the average score. So in this case, the suboptimal in this example for the subsection advocacy and relationships would be 3. Okay, so you've got that column. Let me just slide this over here.
So those are not average scores, they are consensus scores, correct?
Yes.
That's a good point. We should probably not label them average, because that's exactly, we're trying to avoid average, but it's what they decide is their final score.
We can certainly make this change. This is a learning opportunity for us as well. The next column would be the importance rating of each subsection, and there are different importance ratings that the consultants can decide upon in working with the organization. You can, if you were to say, well, this is important, but it's not an immediate priority, you can do that, and then a score would be assigned to that in the priority score column, okay? So what we eventually get to is we get a weighted value on the far right for each subsection, which is basically, and forgive me, on my end I'm having to toggle around all of the other things on Jan's screen, so that's why this is, oops, why it's moving around a bit here. Let me, I think I can work around it as long as it's not too much movement for our viewers at home. Okay, so we get to a weighted value for each of these. Now, this we'd actually previously sorted it, but once you get to that, let me just show you something here. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the data sorting in Excel. But once we get to that, we can actually mouse over that whole selection and go to sort in the data formulas in Excel, and we would just sort on the weighted value and from largest to smallest, and we've done that already, of course, and we've come up with these weighted values. Now, this weighted value, let me just back up a little bit. This weighted value is the product of your average score, or your score, we don't want to use the word average anymore, but the consensus score multiplied by the suboptimal of the consensus score multiplied by the priority weighting, which gives us a weighted value product, as you see up here in the formula bar. So long and short, this approach is a way for you to work with for the consultants to work with the organization to quickly synthesize both the priority of each subsection to the organization and the score. So for example, let's just look through these for a minute. Oh, sorry, Jan. I don't like your pad very much. You might have a subsection that actually, had a kind of a middling score, like administration. The organization has rated it as important, but not super important. So it kind of gave it a mid-range value. I mean, just the way it worked out in this example. Let's see what came out for technology, and this is all fictitious. It's something we've made up, but let's say we had a consensus score of 3.86 on technology, but the organization also thought, well, it's important, but it's not really an immediate priority for us, the weighted value of that is quite low. So as you can see, this is a, I mean, once you work through this with the organization, it's something that could be helpful for you to talk through the prioritization with the organization. It's not intended to be a substitute for the expertise of our service corps members, but we see it as an adjunct and helpful to kind of speed along the decision-making process. Any questions on this at all?
Will we get a copy of this, and will the clients get a copy of this, all prioritized like this?
I'm sorry, there was some background noise.
Okay, will we and or the client get this spreadsheet prioritized in this way?
You would get the spreadsheet without the scores put in it, and then you would get it like that. So you'd have to put in the scores from the organization, and then you would have to assign the importance rating of each of those sections to come up with weighted values.
And where does that come from, the importance rating? Is that on the form?
No, it's already in the spreadsheet. So you would in consultation with your organization and your other consultant would figure out how important is each subsection to the organization.
Okay. You would fill in the average scores once they've completed the online assessment or the consensus score, you call it the score. That would get filled in once you have the daily report off of the online system. And then you would want to have a conversation with the organization around setting the priorities. And then a conversation with, so what does that tell us about what are the 3 or 4 things we're going to focus on?
Okay, would that be at meeting 2 or meeting 3?
Sorry, I'm not sitting on the computer. You'll have this prioritization conversation in meeting 3. And in meeting 2, you'll understand what the scores are. They'll be entered into an online portal after that conversation, and then you'll be given reports leading up to meeting number 3, so that you can have a conversation around.
You're not coming through. You're not close enough to the microphone.
Thank you. Carrie just moved. I apologize. I'm sitting in the speaker's chair now. So in meeting 2, that's when you'll have the conversation and come to consensus. The client lead will enter those scores into an online survey so that we can send you several reports that tell you what the just capture what the organization decided, and then also give you some, I think it's averages per element. And so you'll have that information to then put into this template. This template will be available to you on Basecamp. We could probably provide the admin support to transfer the numbers for you so that it's ready to go. And then in meeting 3, this tool is available to you to use to help facilitate the conversation around priorities.
Okay, so meeting 3.
Does that make sense, or am I making it clear as mud?
No, that makes sense.
Okay. Any other questions about this tool? We were hoping to just provide you with a resource to just help make things a little bit more objective and keep in mind all of the different elements. Again, we're aware that people kind of tend to lean one way based on their experience and area of expertise, and wanted to make sure that we're intentional talking about each of the individual elements and making it relatively easy to get through the noise and identify a little bit more objectively where to focus attention. And I'd say the conversation around priorities, some of these things could be really important to the organization, but there may be things that they can do themselves, so they don't necessarily need your consulting to help them improve. And so that's a part of this to keep in mind as well. it's what's not only of the utmost importance to the organization in this moment, but where do we need the additional consulting to point us in the right direction? What is overwhelming? What seems unmanageable that we would need consulting support on?
So let me be clear on that, Jan.
Sure.
That the importance rating is less a importance to the organization, but importance to requiring outside consulting assistance.
Yeah, this is a little bit of work in progress. I don't want to misspeak here, and I'm sorry if I'm leading you in an incorrect direction. I think in order to just on paper look at the numbers and say what should we get for help, ask for help on, it would make sense to have the conversation around what's important to have consulting on. I think you can use the tool like that. You could also use the tool to capture the organization's actual priorities, not just what they want help on, but what are their ultimate priorities, and then just weed through the list based on the weighted value and talk about, well, what can we address ourselves? What do we need help on? It's really up to you. We just wanted a way to frame it so that you're being intentional, that the whole team is being intentional about each of the different elements and subsections, and to kind of objectify a little bit what the organization prioritizes.
And the analogy I would use, Sheldon, is that there was a difference between kind of making the pathway, clearing the way so the organization can get itself organized to take on an issue, and picking up pennies along the pathway. So there's going to be a lot of things that they're going to see in the self-assessment that will essentially be pennies they can pick up. Things they're not doing, they can simply start doing. There are good resources on our website or in other places that help them do that, but they're things that they can implement and accumulate. So the focus of this discussion of the importance rating is more of the importance rating figuring out that pathway. And that leads past you, as again, as I said, at some point you're stepping off the path and they're continuing on their way. And they need to be doing it all internally. They may be asking us for more help, they may be asking somebody else for more help. But it's what are the areas, and I think it'll come fairly quickly because we see in the cohort programs that use the same process pretty quickly. People start descending in on the areas where they've got confusion or lack of clarity around what to do next, or they know where they want to go, but they're just really not clear what steps they need to take to get there.
And I don't know if others are having a hard time hearing you, Nancy. There's some feedback happening, a box rattling or something.
Yeah, no, it's like a crunchy sound.
It's a bit muddled.
So
I have a question. This is Rich Wallace. Can you hear me?
We can. I'd encourage you to either, if you have noise going on in the background, if you can mute your phone. I want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to speak up, so I won't mute you yourself or for you, but if you could mute yourself if you're eating or whatever, that would be great. And go ahead.
That's helped. Thank you.
Thank you. That helped very much. Thank you. Was that Rich?
Oh yeah, you did hear me.
Yeah, I heard you. Go ahead.
All right, thanks. I was just wondering, I mean, it seems like at this point in the process, it would be helpful to be talking to the client about what results they're trying to achieve as an organization, or any chronic problems that they're trying to solve, in order to, kind of inform this prioritization. Is that built in anywhere into the process, kind of talking about organizational results and what they're happy with, not happy with, what kind of, improvements they'd like to see?
I mean, go ahead, Nancy.
I think that's a good way to focus in the first call you have with them, and it goes back to some of the things that were said about building trust. Is asking those questions when you first connect with them. And it's before they've done the self-assessment, so they may change their mind. once they do the self-assessment. But that's a great way to start the relationship with them with questions.
All right, thanks.
This is Susan. Just a quick comment. This matrix would be very helpful to include with the Catalyst program.
Oh, that's good feedback. Thank you. We had a lot of questions about it at the last orientation, and one of the things that people asked for was some written instructions to share with clients to help them understand how the tool can be used. So we will definitely put that together. But I think Deborah herself, when she and I were talking about this, and she mentioned that she thought this could be helpful to other cohorts. So we'll definitely make sure that their program managers have access to it. Thank you. Thank you for that comment. We always run the risk of over-structuring. We know that some of our most experienced consultants don't like templated programs, and so it's like, oh, we want to make it easy for folks and make sure that we have some consistency, but we also don't want to turn them off by having it be overly projected. And so we're hoping that much of your expertise can be spent on developing that trust and facilitating the conversation, as well as helping to frame the recommendations. And in a few minutes here, we're going to hear from Jim Pullen, one of our Service Corps members and fellows, who is taking the lead on developing some draft recommendations that we'll want your feedback on, and then also the personalized recommendations that you'll be developing for organizations. So we're hoping that will be a great opportunity to engage your expertise. So. Okay, I'll go back to our slides now. We're hoping that third meeting will take a good couple of hours to not only touch base on the assessment and just debrief it a little bit, but then to also go through that prioritization process and then flesh out the issues that the organization identifies. Just get as much context about it as you can. You want to figure out, based on where the organization is at, what are they striving for? Which standard are they hoping to achieve? The most natural thing would be to go up one notch, or is that where they're at? Are they overly ambitious, or are they just part of the next notch? But getting a sense of where they're wanting to go, what resources they might have access to be able to get there, what challenges, unique situations they might be dealing with that you'll need to be mindful of, and get a clear sense of what success looks like. So you take their feedback and again do a little bit of sleuthing, put your expertise to work, talk to experts here at 501 Commons or subject matter experts here at 501 Commons, and work together to put together a slate of recommendations. So that's the gist of the third planning meeting. The fourth, again, is providing the recommendations, and I'm going to have Jim Pullen talk to us a little bit about what he's putting together and what you'll have to pull from in addition to your own expertise and perspective and different people that may be able to offer their opinions and perspectives. So I'm going to switch seats.
Hello and good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. So what you're seeing on your screen now, I believe, is the draft recommendations resource. And what I wanted to do at this point is not to go over this stuff in any detail, except perhaps just to tell you how the document is structured. Because we have done some research and put together a document that has each of the standards, some info that come directly from the assessment. You'll see that on the first line there. We've got some discussion of the topic, a comment about what sorts of resources are available, whether or not there's any on the 501 Commons website. That's under the Inside Resources section. And then links to other resources outside. And then that is all the heading of, right, that's all the heading of the individual standard, and then we start with the description of the first level, and then there's a section for the steps to get from the first level to the second level. Now, the format, this is identified under the sample advice. The format that we had originally planned was to have this in a report generated on the completion of the assessment and then provided back to that. And so the format was, because we intended to produce all of this in a lengthy report, the format was restricted to a short paragraph of directions and perhaps a couple of useful links. So the whole thing would be not exactly a Twitter feed, but something reduced to that kind of size. Since then, we have decided instead to put a web page up for each individual standard, so that there would the standard would appear on at the top of the page, each of the levels, and a discussion of how to move from level to level. So the conversation or the explanation can be a little bit more conversational, perhaps fluid, and a little bit more expanded beyond the initial limitations. Now, in most cases, we have the structure, we are developing the content that go in at the individual level recommendations. We're sort of spottily developed so far, but expect to be much further along in a month. And we are hoping that we will have your insights and abilities captured in the process to both flesh out the resources and the directions. Are there any questions?
So we're to concentrate, though, on the 3 standards or 4 that we're going to make recommendations on. We don't have to go through this exercise for every standard.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, so if something's been deemed not a high priority and we're not going to focus on it, then we don't have to go through this exercise for 15 standards or whatever.
Right. No, we will have the document ready for you for reference. And as you develop recommendations for the high priority items with the client, it would be very useful to supply those recommendations to us so that they can be incorporated in the document itself.
Okay, I'm not sure I understand what document we're talking about.
Oh, this is what I'm showing you is an extract from a Word document that will be provided to each of the consultants as part of their kit.
What that will do is that'll give you, it's essentially your cheat sheet on any of the standards. It'll also go to the client, so you're absolutely right. You don't need to add to or amend those things which are not a priority for the organization. If you see something that you think could be improved, as our, as insiders to 501 Commons, we would welcome your advice or recommendations. But in terms of your interaction with the clients, you're going to pick the sub-areas that they want to focus on. Remember, there are 12 of those that they want to focus on. In your effort to help them determine their pathway to improving their organization in each of those 12 sub-areas is the focus of your recommendations. As you delve into those. I'm sorry?
No, keep going.
And we recommend you choose about 3. You know, 3 is the magic number we use in all of the cohorts. You can decide that the organization can only handle 2, or you can decide that for this organization there should be 4. But about 3 sub-areas would be given focus. They may have some parts of that sub-area or subsection of the assessment handled, and they may have, you know, a big hole in other areas, or they may be doing, you know, poorly in all of those areas. In those areas, we want you to delve in a little bit more, and you can start with the advice that we're providing. But as you look for other resources, as you think through what they need to do to move the organization forward, you're going to write that down in a memo to your organization, and we're going to benefit from what you've written so that we can improve our recommendations bank document, which is that's what you're seeing is a piece of that kind of bank of recommendations that we're developing.
Yeah, one of the advantages of the current format to put all this stuff up on a web page is that we will be able to revise it and improve it on a regular basis quite easily. So, so your feedback and recommendations for improvement will be greatly appreciated.
I see a note from Kathleen that she was not hearing me. Jan, were you hearing me?
You're a little muffled, so you just make sure you're directing your octopus to the computer. I think we'll be okay. At times you kind of faded in and out.
Okay, sorry. I'm speaking really loudly.
I'm yelling at my computers. Oh, poor Carrie and Jim.
Well, it may be useful to just repeat what I said about how to choose the focus.
What's that, Nancy?
It may be helpful if you could repeat for people then what I said about choosing the 3 sub-areas to focus on.
So I think what you mean is that everyone will have access to this entire resource. So it has information about how to move the organization up from one level to the next. But you'll obviously just want to focus on the 3 priorities that the organization chooses and have this as a reference. So we have a template for a memo that you're welcome to use to articulate your own recommendations. So this is just meant to provide you with a little bit of background information for things to think about to provide those recommendations. Is that what you meant, Nancy?
And when they pick those areas will be at a subsection level. So for instance, fundraising or financial management or technology. And it may not be all of the standards within that sub-area, but generally their focus will lie with the sub-areas.
Right. So focusing on the specific sub-areas and the standards that correspond with that versus the entire element.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions about that? It's still a little bit of a work in progress, but you'll have access to the tool before any of you get to the point of needing to provide the recommendations and writing your memo. Okay, so that is one of the great recommendations that we'll have resources available to you. Just also want to point out that on our website is a huge wealth of knowledge that is helpful to both you and the clients themselves. We have a statewide nonprofit resource directory that lists all kinds of vetted consultants across the state that have expertise working with nonprofits that can be a resource to organizations, as well as our own services. There are all kinds of tools and templates that organizations can download and customize to make their own. We don't want anyone to have to start from scratch. In most cases, there's something that's been tried out before, and we've done the work of vetting all the different options and trying to come up with some good options for you to use, for both you and the clients to use. So we definitely encourage you to take a look at our website, become familiar with the information that's available there, and just know that it's available as a resource to both you and the client. We have a pretty full slate of expertise amongst our staff team, so we're available as well. If the particular priorities that surface within your organization aren't areas in which you have a whole lot of knowledge, let us know. We can definitely connect you with different team members for quick consults and just pick our brains in terms of high-level recommendations that we might provide to organizations. And then we will be creating a Basecamp project so that you have access to each other. There's a huge wealth of knowledge just on this webinar. And so I definitely encourage you to reach out to your peers and bounce ideas around and use Basecamp to have this conversation so that others can learn from it as well. Nancy, is there anything else that you would add to that?
Nope.
Okay.
Sounds great.
Okay. So just in terms of, yeah, go ahead.
Jan, this is Weldon. Just one question on the use of Basecamp.
Yeah.
If we have a specific question that we want to ask, should we just ask you or one of the staff members, and then you decide whether the question and the answer should be shared with the whole team or not?
You're welcome to. I imagine that there are going to be similarities amongst organizations. So I'd almost say if it pertains to the elements, go ahead and post it on Basecamp and maybe just tag me so that I know there's a question I need to respond to, and then maybe consultants just know that there's additional information on Basecamp, conversations that will be happening on Basecamp, that if you put the title in the message, people can filter based on the topics that are of interest to them. Does that sound reasonable? So we can kind of...
Yeah, I'm just asking what your preference is, because there might be specific just how-to things that doesn't relate to working with the client or in Basecamp or something that you can then decide as a staff who responds to the individual whether it should be shared with everyone or not.
Yeah, you're welcome to direct. Go ahead, Nancy.
Well, if you've got something that's just related to your project, you'll have a project Basecamp, you know, a Basecamp for your project, and then you'll also have a Basecamp site for the whole team. And so if it's just about the project, you can label that as your internal response. And in other words, it just goes to Jan, and it's only seen by Jan and the people supporting her.
Okay, so this will be, Basecamp will be set up for each project, the same as Springboard and Catalyst and all of those.
We'll also have a group, because we're really, one of the things we're really excited about is the opportunity for this sort of a learning community, and for you folks to help us figure out how to improve this and how to improve the recommendations.
Okay.
Yeah, so questions specific to the process or unrelated to the elements, go ahead and direct them to me, whatever way is comfortable to you. But if there's questions pertaining to the elements, it'd be great if you could capture it on Basecamp. You know, just tag me unless you're asking the group for their feedback. But please go ahead and put the title or the subject of the request in the title so that people know what's there if they want to learn more about what you were asking about. Oops.
Okay.
Okay, so in that final meeting, when you're sharing your memo with a draft or hopefully finalized recommendations at that point, maybe draft if they have feedback on it, you'll want to just touch base with your client on what an appropriate next step might be to acting on their recommendations. Talk about who might be responsible, when that step will be completed, just to kind of help shepherd them closer toward implementation. Again, our role isn't to see them through completion or achievement of the goals, but to point them in the right direction. And I think part of that is setting them up for success, so they're at least thinking about what's next. They have a tangible action that they can take, an idea of who and when that step might be completed. So. I think we talked through most of this. All of the services that are available to you or resources available to you are essentially available to clients. One thing that I don't think I touched on before is that we do have free personalized assistance through my colleague Matt Ficus. You are welcome to call the directory and get answers to questions that clients may have, and feel free to utilize him as a resource. Again, he serves a little bit like in your role, pointing people in the right direction to additional resources and tools and whatnot. But if consultant or excuse me, end of the day, clients are wanting that additional support, it's great to let them know that he is available. Okay. Any questions? We are so close to 5 o'clock. 6 more minutes.
I think we're probably out of questions for now.
Well, thank you.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I'm Ron.
So this is Catherine. Who did you say would offer the free personalized assistance?
Matt Ficus is our statewide directory program manager and information and referral program manager.
Okay.
And that phone number is on our website if people just want to bounce ideas around with him.
Okay.
That's primarily that's kind of a leave behind for people to just recognize as they start to work with the assessment and start to work on issues beyond those that you've helped them map out a pathway for. If they come up against some other barrier or they need consulting help, or they need a resource, that Matt is a free resource available to any nonprofit. Not specifically for this program or specifically for these clients, but just to make sure that they are aware that that resource exists at 501.
Okay. Thank you.
I had one question. This is Rich Wallace. What's the timeline for making up the teams and assigning us to clients? When does this all get started?
I want to circle back with all the consultants just to confirm who is for sure interested in moving forward, and then it'll probably take me a week or so to figure out how to make the assignment. So probably toward the end of next week, maybe the start of the following week, I'll be introducing folks. And we've had about 5 organizations express interest already. I just need to get through the initial conversations with them before I start connecting them with consultants. So it's a little bit of a rolling basis, but I'd say maybe another 2 weeks or so to have a sense of yeah, where you're going.
Okay, all right.
That's a great question. And so Thursday, I will be adding, if you haven't been already, I'll add you to the Basecamp project, but I'll definitely make sure that all of the slides from today are up there, and just make sure that everything's ready to go. So if you have questions, I want to take a look at the handouts and whatnot that were posted on this webinar, that you have access to it. So look for more information from me by the end of the day on Thursday, and another week and a half or so information about who you might be working with. And then again, I anticipate being able to connect you with clients on a rolling basis as they come in. I needed to get through the consultant orientations before I could start talking with all the organizations and getting the contract signed, but it's coming.
Okay.
Well, thank you all so very much. We managed to get through all of this in exactly 2 hours. I so appreciate your time and attention, and I hope that you will go and do whatever you need to do to handle tonight. Happy Tuesday.
Well, thanks for this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Well done.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.